So yeah, as Mark has said that, yeah, I'm going to talk about when you can't grow lilacs and other favorites. This is a topic that Blake and Elizabeth came up for me to do. So we'll see how I do. As Mark was saying, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, small town, and the palette of plants up there is quite different than here. And so most of my talk will be for Northerners. I hate to say it. If there's anybody from the South, further south who moved up here and is wanting to know, there's not as much I have for that. But there are other things that you can ask about later on. But these are some that I came up with, and some of them, like lilacs, are probably one of the most common ones that you'd see up north. That there's some that we can grow here, and you'll find out a little bit later. So, anyways, let's get going. So I'm going to just jump right in and into this. So woody plants and herbaceous plants are the two areas of focus I'll do. And woody is what we're going to start with. And some of the reasons that some of these woodies aren't as happy here as they might have been up where you were in further north or in the western United States even, is that here in the southeast in Piedmont of North Carolina, the weather's a little bit different. We have constant summer heat, and with that, we get humidity, which inadvertently keeps our temperatures at night up. Some would say that may or may not be some of the issues with some of these plants, but I see some things that'll grow out in the western United States where they have low humidity and cool nights, regardless of summer or daytime heat, that they can grow those that we can't grow here. So that's part of that. We're also, every few years, we have a drought. It might be part of the summer. It might be 2 weeks. It might be 2 months. It might be, in the mid to late 2000s, we had multiple years of drought. So plants dealing with that are often struggle a little bit here. Maybe not today in this winter right now, it seemed like it, but we sometimes do have lack of chill for some of those plants that you grew up with other places. They like it a little bit colder. They need to sleep a little longer. They aren't, like you might say, night owls, that require little rest. They want some extended period of downtime to recuperate from year to year and to be reinvigorated. And we don't always have that. And the availability of some of our plants that you grew other places, where they came from is also sometimes important and as to whether they will do well or don't do well here in this case. So, if the plant came from a more northerly climate, doesn't always translate to growing here in the Piedmont of North Carolina. And all those factors in general, so add up, especially with woodies, that being that they're long-term plants. They're not those short annual that you can get away with, or perennials even, the herbaceous perennials that only live, they might live several years, but they don't require long times to get to their mature size, and that you might expect on a tree or a shrub that it may fizzle before it gets to that, is what I'm going at basically. So we're going to jump right in now to some of the plants that, to me, were a little bit nostalgic, that you again may remember from other places. And the first, of course, being the lilacs. And Syringa vulgaris is the common lilacs that you see up north. And they are, again, like I said, nostalgic for me. I remember them always flowering around Mother's Day or a little after up home. And that's only provided we didn't have a late hard freeze, because that could actually get the buds. But that fragrance, I still remember. We had some behind our house at my parents', or you'd see them driving along the road, and always love that, and see the flowers and the fragrance. And the reason they do well up there is because they're from southeastern Europe, the Balkans area, where they have relatively cold winters, and there's a good temperature variation from day to night, which is one of our problems here in the southeast, that we don't have that. And as a result, they tend to suffer with a bit down here and don't prosper. They might not outright die, but they're not going to give you the same bang that you're going to get up further north. And then they do get some foliar issues, and it's like powdery mildew is something that's an issue wherever they're grown, I think. But when you add on the fact that they're being stressed out by excessive heat and humidity, it can cause them to really go into decline instead of meeting their full potential that they did up and where you were originally from. So there are some alternatives to the traditional common lilacs and or syringa, and one that we've grown in the garden for years now, and a couple different spots, and it's one I like. Is one a syringa Betsy Ross. It's a National Arboretum introduction, actually. And it was selected for its heat tolerance and a bit of disease resistance. So it's a little bit better suited to the Southeast. And that comes from a different species of lilac, which is not from Southeastern Europe and the Balkans. It's from East Asia, so China and Korea, which is where a lot of our flora that we grow in our landscapes here in the Southeast comes from, actually, are from Korea, Japan, and China. They have comparable climates that help us help the plants from those areas typically are a little bit better acclimatized to our region here. And so that being said, the Betsy Ross is a hybrid with this oblata, and I couldn't find out the second parent of it, and it just said it was a numbered species, but it has the traditional lilac fragrance that you are accustomed to. It does flower a little bit earlier than traditional lilac, and we don't have oblata in the garden anymore, but we do still have Betsy Ross, and they would flower about mid-March for us most years. So early lilac is what Syringa oblata is also typically known as, and it very much shows up in that in how they grow here. They are earlier, so they kind of do avoid some of our heat. Though if we do have a late hard frost or a hard frost in March, they can get damaged. Though it's always welcome to see those in flower then, and they'll flower into early April then, typically for us. Also, the Syringa oblata gives us a little bit better powdery mildew resistance that you don't get from the Syringa vulgaris. So there's one of those stressors that are taken away, so that helps that plant to prosper. And there's some other hybrids which are really similar to this between Syringa oblata and Syringa vulgaris, which you'll sometimes see Hyacinth floras, which I don't mention that here, but those are a little bit better suited for us because of the characteristic of the oblata being in their parentage. So another one that I really like that we no longer have in the garden, but it was great for decades in the garden, and we ended up finally taking it out, was Syringa laciniata, which is a cut leaf type of lilac. You really wouldn't think of it when it's not flower that it's a lilac. It has these pinnate lobed leaves, not quite compound leaves, but almost. They look like little feathers almost. And it's a hybrid between the vulgaris and another species, Proto laciniata. And it's, again, that species is from Western China, which, again, plants from there tend to be a little bit better adapted for our growing conditions. It doesn't have the same look, though. There's long wands of flowers that occur along the leaf axils or the leaf buds along the stem. So you get these really long shoots that are covered. It doesn't get the typical plumes that we get of the traditional lilacs that you think of, but it does give you that something similar and to grow. So anyways, that's one I really have liked over the decades now, being at the Arboretum. Another one or another group now, there's some newer repeat flowering lilacs. And one of them, which was one of the first that really got promoted, was Syringa penda. And there's since been some other selections made that repeat flower. And they're smaller growing, which is a nice feature as far as I'm concerned. If you're moving into the triangle area, you might not have that large of a yard. And lilacs tend to take up a lot of space if they're allowed to. These tends to say much more compact, and that comes from the other species that are involved in their parentage. Myri, which I couldn't find out exactly where that one was from, but Petula, which we grow in the garden, which is from Northeast China, and Microphylla from Western China again. They've imparted these uh, characteristics, a little bit more compact, smaller leaves, um, but that also there's a repeat characteristic of the flowering, which is a bonus. But to me, the fragrance on this is it's not as good. It's reminiscent of the lilac's cousin, which is a privet, which to me sticks. But and so this, I mean, the repeat flowering is the reason to grow this. And it does look like a miniature or more compact traditional lilac, though, in that sense. And but again, it's going to fit into the average landscape a bit better and may give you an extended period of interest. So we're going to go on here to something other than actually than a lilac, but it's something that might work as a good alternative that is pretty, I mean, they do really well in our climate here, and you'll see these around the city and just planted in general. Or the Vitex Agnes castus, the chase trees. Um, these are actually in the mint family, and they're from the Mediterranean. So Mediterranean's a little bit warmer than the rest of Europe, and so they're much more heat tolerant. They actually aren't terribly cold tolerant. They're only going to about zone 7A reliably as a woody, and then you get further north and they act as an herbaceous perennial. Um, but for us, they can form large shrubs or small trees if you let them. The great thing about them is they flower literally for 2 to 3 months in our summers here. And I don't know, a lot of people, a lot of my volunteers tell me they have major deer issues in their neighborhoods. These typically don't have that issue. They're like I said, in the mint family, which has these pungent oils on it, and they avoid eating those as a result of that. But that being said, they are wonderful for pollinators. You will find bees and butterflies all over these throughout their flowering period in the summer. But there is one caveat with them, though. They have a habit of liking to self-sow a little bit. So you do occasionally have to check to see if there are any weedlings popping up here to keep them from taking over, though they are not terribly aggressive. So they're very drought tolerant. And again, just a really good long season of interest for these in our landscapes. So we're going to jump to something totally different now. Where I grew up too, there were blue spruce planted commonly, as well as Norway spruce. But the blue spruce always stood out in that glaucous color that it's always stood out in a all but green landscape that we had up north. They're not overly happy here. Not that they haven't been in our can't be grown here in the southeast. They tend to sulk a bit, and that's very apparent when you look at where they're actually found. And they're actually found at elevations of 6 to 10,000 feet in the central Rockies around Colorado, Wyoming, maybe parts of Utah. And so that's not what we have here in the Piedmont. Again, we're at 300 to 350 feet. If you go up into the mountains in North Carolina, yes, you can grow these quite well. But in our elevation, in our extensive or extended periods of heat and humidity, they just do not appreciate that, and they tend to struggle. And they're rated actually from zone 2 to 7. So they can grow those the whole way up almost to the middle of Canada and into Alaska, and they'd be happy as a clam. They're so much more adapted to a cool summer location than us. And because of that, we don't get the large specimens that you'd see in the north. But if you really do need a blue spruce, you can find them that are more compact selections, which or dwarf selections. The great thing about these is that you can squeeze them into a bit of a microclimate, a part shade location, a north-facing slope where they're not getting the intense heat that they might otherwise. And they're often the propagation of the spruces. They don't grow them by cuttings or seeds that is of the cultivars. They're grown by grafting. And so the grafted plants tend to be grafted onto standard rootstocks. So you have a more compact or a dwarf plant with a full-size root system underneath it. And I find it a little bit better able to cope with the situations we have here in the Southeast than to actually grow a standard blue spruce, which gets, 30, 40 feet tall if it would actually grow that long here. Even these dwarfs, I have the example of Hoopsii, which we had in the garden for longer than I've been working there now. There's two of them now, probably 25 to 30 years that they've been in the garden. They're starting to look a little bit draggled, I will say that. They're getting much more open, though they are still doing reasonably well. Thume has been in the old conifer collection in East Arboretum for probably 30 to 35 years. It's only topped out at like 4 or 5 feet. It's a really compact one. And it's persisted. So a little bit better than even just the compact selection. So if you must have a blue spruce, those are a couple options, but something that might work a little bit better for you and is a little bit better suited for us are the Cupressus arizonicas. And we have 3 or 4 selections in the garden. And if you want the blue, that's great because there is Sapphire Skies, Carolina Sapphire. Those are 2 really good blue selections. Blue Ice is another one that we have. They've been around. They do quite well here. As you can see, they're from Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and northern Mexico. In those areas, they actually tend to get some summer monsoonal rain. So it's kind of comparable to us here in our summers when we have our off and on wet and dry spells. So they're fairly well adapted to us here in the Southeast. They are super fast growing for us. They really are much faster than the blue spruce will ever be in our climate here. And they can get a little bit more open as they age out, since that top picture, you can see a picture of our Sapphire Skies in the garden. And what's the one below it, directly below it, is when it was a bit younger, actually, and it was a bit more dense. But that conical blue tree, though, structure is what you're going to get from those. They're often used as hedging material. I don't recommend them for that. I prefer to see them as a specimen plant, though. So and they tend to have a better presence as far as I'm concerned. They are coming again from the southwestern United States and northern Mexico. They have very good heat tolerance for us. So they are unaffected when we do have crazy weather, like in 2024, we got to 106 for the first time. So unfazed by that. There are a few other forms, and as even with the blue spruce, there aren't all the blue spruce aren't blue. There's actually gold ones of those, which so there's some gold forms of Arizona cypress to add to that as well. So one in the picture here is sulfuria, but there's one called limelight, I believe, yes, that we've had for years in the garden as well. It's been a good selection. But there's some shapes, some are more open than others, and that's where you get some of the variations. But very fast growing, no problem though for us here. Another tree I grew up with, and my front yard back home, there is about a 90-foot tall, 100-year-old eastern white pine. So for me, that's something somewhat sentimental, despite the fact that it liked to shed branches when we'd have a heavy snow, which is normal for them. But anyways, Few reasons for that not doing so well here in our area of the state. We have very heavy clay soils. I find that down around the sandhills, they can get away with growing eastern white pine a bit better than us. And there's actually about 45 minutes to an hour from here, there's still a nice natural population of eastern white pine on a north-facing slope along the deep and rocky rivers at the White Pine Preserve. But you typically don't see them growing here happily, except for in these microclimates. Again, much like the spruce, there's dwarf selections you can get. You can grow them in your garden, but you're not going to get this majestic 90-foot tall tree. But there are some other possibilities for us here to grow. On the edge, from what I'm finding out about our Pinus parviflora, which we grow several different clones in the garden, though they're rated at zone 7, which for the heat side. So may move out of those as being a viable plant, but they tend to fit really well into our landscapes because there are lots of compact selections of them. But some that have some much better promise for us, as far as I'm concerned, and more of a traditional look to the eastern white pines that you might see out in the mountains or where I'm from in western Pennsylvania, are some of the Mexican species of white pine and southwestern United States species of white pine. Again, much like the Cupressus arizonica, they are fairly well adapted to our heat and humidity and periodic droughts that we're now having. So one of the ones that I find interesting is Pinus strobiformis, the foxtail. Is a selection that we have, and that one's from fairly far south, actually, in Mexico, and it's a mountain species down there. That's done very well, but it's on the edge, being that it is only theoretically hardy to zone 7, and on the warm side, I mean the cold side, I should say, not the warm side. So it's kind of the opposite of our eastern white pine, but it's done very well for us, and you can find that one available sometimes. But a new one for us that I'm really liking is a cross between the Pinus strobus and another of the Mexican southwestern species, which Iacahutis, I can't spit that one out, sorry. Pinus domingo, and it kind of is the best of both worlds. It's has that heat and drought resistance, as well as some of the resistance to when we actually do have colder weather from the Pinus strobus side of the white pines. So something that to me kind of is reminiscent is of these white pines, maybe in our landscape, and you do see these around Raleigh, are some of the cedruses, Cedrus atlantica and Cedrus deodoras. They have that broad spreading branches that some of our white pines would naturally have. And so you can get those as well. And they come from some different climates too. Again, some that are semi-arid, but also more humid and more heat tolerant than our white pines. And when you find out that they're from Morocco and from the Himalayan region, depending on the species, you can see where that comes from. And there's some various different forms, especially the deodoras, that you can get yellow needled ones, and you can get blue, really deep blue needled ones. They tend to be a bit more moisture and humidity tolerant to me than the Cedrus atlanticas, which you can really get some dark or spectacular blue shades on those, but and there's some weeping forms that are really good on those, but they aren't always as happy with our humidity, but they do grow here fairly well. Their habit gets much more open, much like the white pine as they age. But there are cultivars that are much better suited for our small landscapes too. Again, like this one in the foreground here on the bottom is Cedrus Atlantic, or Cedrus deodora, Field and Blue, which you can see there on a frosty morning in our conifer garden out a few years back. And it's perfectly fine with the snow load and ice that we've been having. So that's a great thing about that one. But it tops out at maybe 4 to 5 feet tall and 6 or 8 feet wide. So fits into a landscape. It's another tree that we often see here, or where I grew up. And you do see them down here, though they're not always as happy as they could be. And if you go to the mountains, you see them, or the sugar maples. Straight saccharum, I mean, it's rated zone 3 to 8. We're getting on the verge of the southern limits for them at this point. We're now the zones 8A here in the Raleigh area, and we are having more and more heat, and they typically do not like that. Despite the fact also that they're being planted as street trees, they are not overly happy with that. They tend to get much more disease and insect issues with the stresses of being planted along a street that is a heat sink and perpetually pumps out heat in the summer and even through the winter months, and it helps with insects. And one being the gloomy scale, which you'll see on a lot of maples that are planted along streets now, both red maples and sugar maples. But again, we do have some options for these as well. One that I'm really like the model I used for said or the design for my slide here kind of threw things off a little bit, but the diagonal pictures are the same in this. So, anyways, Acer scuccii is a species of sugar maple from Mexico. It's only found in like 5 or 6 different locations. Actually, it goes into Guatemala. So Mexico and Guatemala, and only 5 or 6 locations have been identified where they exist in the wild. In their native realms, they sometimes can be tardily deciduous to even semi-evergreen. But in our climate, they tend to be deciduous. And we have a large one in our xeric part of our garden. And I was reading that they tend not to color up real well until they reach fruiting size. So it can take several years for them to start getting decent color. And ours has really started to show its stuff the last several years in the garden now, since it was planted as a seedling in about I'm going to say about 2008 or 2009, and it's about 35, 40 feet tall and become a spectacular tree. Though that may or may not fit in your landscape, but we have a new one in our garden which we're trying to get propagated, and it's one we find really cool. It's much more compact, and we've called it Tequila Sunrise, and it's one that the color of the new growth on it comes out pink, and then it fades to a creamy yellowy green. It's transitions. It's really a cool plant, and but this species in general, it has much more heat and drought tolerance. So this is going to fit into our landscapes much more, I think, in the future. Going on the native side, though, we do actually have some native sugar maples that aren't saccharum in our area. We have the chalk maple, for instance, which is an understory tree, which may be growing outside your house right now. If you're in some of the wooded parts of Raleigh, you can find them. So they don't get as large as a traditional sugar maple, but they can give you some nice color in the fall if you keep an eye out for it. And there's also a really cool dwarf variegated one we have at the garden called Confederate Ghost, which I've found very favorable, and it's much more dense. It will not give you that big shade tree look. I will say that, though. You could get that, I think, from the Acer scuccii, and those are just becoming. The Acer scuccii is just becoming available a little bit more in the United States than it had been. So keep a lookout for that species. Another thing I grew up seeing along roads and in yards where I'm from were crab apples, or the malus, which there's malus found all over actually the northern hemisphere, and they're either deciduous, and there are a couple species that are crazy semi-evergreens, which I haven't got to do well for us here in our garden yet. But part of that could be that a lot of them are disease prone in our heat and humidity again. Most of the selections that are available of the crab apples have been made from the Eurasian populations, and they come from Central Asia, and it's a drier climate, and again they tend to get bedraggled in our summers if foliar wise. They'll don't set fruit as well as they would, because again, we don't have that a sufficient chill that we have or that you have further north. So you don't get as many good flowers, and then when they do flower, they don't set as much fruit. And then to add to that, we have foliar diseases, which can make them look sad through the summer months, as well as the possibility of fire blight, which actually gets transmitted when they are in flower and can cause some dieback in them. So there's a lot of reasons that they can be a little bit of a challenge, especially when they're grown in mass plantings. Occasionally, you can get away with a specimen plant here or there, but they tend to build up with disease over time. So, a major alternative for that, and here at the Arboretum, is one of our collections that we're known for are our red buds. In particular, I'll focus on Cercis canadensis, our eastern redbud, as well as the Chinese redbud, Cercis chinensis. But there's so much variation on them that are available now with the breeding work of our former director, Dr. Dennis Werner, among them, and some other people selecting. There's more and more of them becoming available to try in your landscape. And in this picture, you can see several of the color forms that are available in flower forms. So we have doubles, you have singles, you have pale pinks, deep pinks, whites, and then just the traditional pinky, purpley color, not truly red. That you get of them, but they're perfectly adapted to our areas here. They're understory trees in our woodlands naturally here, so they're wonderful for us, unaffected mostly by most diseases. And to add to those flower variation, there's now structural differences as well as foliar differences that you can get available, and that's largely what Dr. Dennis Werner has been working on for the last probably about 30 years. In any ways, some of them here you can see Rising Sun, which was an early mutation that was found, and Merlot, which was one of Denny's, which is a forest pansy hybrid, and Gold Crown, which was found by a dentist of all things, with its speckled variegation. And then you get some new ones, which I don't know if this one will be available this year or next year, hopefully, is the Garden Gem Citrine, I won't say, or NC 2017-92. It's been one that we've had in the trials behind the Arboretum for several years, and I've really been drawn to this thing. It's a compact selection, and to add to that, this spectacular yellow foliage. And then you have the weeping selections that are available as well, and almost all these foliar combinations to add to that. So there's so much out there with the Cercis canadensis, and they're, again, perfectly adapted to our landscapes and soils and heat and humidity, because this is their homeland right here in the Southeast United States. Their cousins from Asia do very well here too. They tend to have a little bit structural difference. Traditional canadensis can be a small upright tree, aside from when you get those dwarf selections or weeping selections that have been made now. But to me, the Cercis chinensis tend to be a low branching, often multi-trunked, either small tree or large shrub. But you can still get some of the variations that you get in the at least flower colors of the Cercis canadensis, our eastern redbuds. There aren't the foliar selections yet that we have in the Cercis canadensis, though. But again, you get some great colors. They are earlier blooming, typically, in my experience, from our canadensis by about 2 weeks, typically, though it's sometimes more. A couple of these pictures, the one you can see is in snow cover there. That's a selection JC made called Celestial Plum. And that was, I think, March 2nd or something when that was taken, of a few years back when we had a snowfall. And it was in full flower. I think some of the flowers did get damaged from that, but plant does fine. The full pink tree on the far, let's see, the far side is actually Kay's Early Hope. This is another selection that we've made here to Arboretum. And that one typically starts flowering the end of February as well, and coming into full flower mid by early to mid-March, and it'll often have flowers underneath the foliage into the middle of April, which is really remarkable about that. So it's early, but it's also persistent. And we've had damage on flowers on that one before, and then it throws out a second flower flush of flowers before it comes into full leaf. So that one's just a really resilient selection. So we'll get into some other things here. So moving from the south, I mean the north to the south, you think, oh, I can grow palm trees. And in North Carolina, we actually have twice as many palm trees natives as two. But only one of them forms a tree. The other is the low growing plant that might be 3 to 6 feet tall and doesn't form a trunk. That's sable minor. Sable palmetto, you will see these out at the coast, all over the place, and that they're native out there. But for us here in the Triangle, they are not reliable. The picture on the smaller plant here on the left-hand side of the screen. That was actually in our scree garden, or our xeri garden, I should say, until I think 2018 when we had 3 degrees and it killed it outright. They aren't reliable here even after several years. Getting them established, there are some selections that have done better than others, but they don't always take, I hate to say it, and we can lose them, despite them being native out on the coast. They also tend to get a scale, at least in our experience at the Arboretum, we get sable scales on them and are pain to get rid of. It doesn't outright kill the plant or anything. It's just they disfigure the leaves and they aren't as pretty. I get them both on the sable minors and the sable palmettos. But something that does a bit better for us is the trachycarpus, or the windmill palms, which are actually Asian in origin. And we're getting some more selections of this that are available, some seed hybrids and different species, but most of them are Trachycarpus fortunii, and fortunii variety, or cultivar, or however you want to say it, wagnerianus, which are nice tree-forming selections. You can see some really large ones of these in Poland Park, in Raleigh, and the great thing about them, they're fast-growing. Like I said, they typically don't get any major insects or diseases. It's just a matter of getting them established. Their first, say, 2 to 3 winters, they may need some protection just to make sure they're well established. Beyond that, they've been rock hardy in our climate. I say they're not weedy. I occasionally get a handful of seeds underneath them, though our native sable minor, which is found about 30 miles east of Raleigh, I literally get carpets of seedlings. They pop up in all over the garden. And if you don't get them out readily, or quickly, they get very well entrenched in there. But they are almost weedy. This Trachycarpus, you get a couple seedlings right underneath the plants on rare occasions. The one with the picture with the McSwain Center in the background, that's actually a really cool seed strain that we were able to get. They are Trachycarpus fortunii wagnerianus crossed with Trachycarpus nanus, and these are about, with the tops of the foliage are about 6 feet tall, and the maybe a foot or so of trunk. They're already starting to flower because of the dwarf characteristic of the nana, which these have been just really good performers for us, and I'm looking forward to see how those do in the long term. But if you can find Trachycarpus and you want a palm, they are the way to go for us here in the Triangle and a bit further west. So much more reliable than our native sable palmettos. For me, I love fuchsia. I grew up in Mother's Day. They would have fuchsias on the nurseries. We'd have them in my family's greenhouse. But I had found a couple that I could actually grow outside in Western Pennsylvania. And this is Fuchsia magellanica. And in this picture, this is one probably discolor, which I took this picture actually in British Columbia several years ago. I can't get Fuchsia magellanica to grow here. It should be winter hardy, or it's definitely winter hardy here, but it does not like it when a lot of most fuchsias don't like it when it gets into the 90s. And we never have 90 in this area now, do we? So basically the plant starts to shut down, and if you have more than a few days to weeks in the 90s, they outright die. And because of that, we don't have them in the large landscapes like they do in the Pacific Northwest, or even to grow hanging basket plants like you would in the northeastern United States, where they're not totally root hardy. But anyways, there are some actually that we have found that have been reliable for us. We have grow two of them in our laugh house. Um, One, it's a species, it's a bit more diminutive in flower, but a good grower in flower, as far as I'm concerned, is Fuchsia hatchabachii. It's a Brazilian species, and gets maybe 3 feet tall, and really delicate flowers, and just graceful as far as I'm concerned to have in the landscape. And Fuchsia Sanihoff, which is a complex hybrid out of some breeding work done in Japan. And there's a few others that have Sani as the first part of their name, which are probably worth growing here because they've been selecting for good heat tolerance. And I was doing some research. I believe it's another species that's native to Brazil, but they didn't disclose what it was, but that's what's giving it some of the heat tolerance. Most of the fuchsias come from areas which are either cloud forest situations at high elevations where they get cool at night, or from further south in Patagonia. I've actually gotten to see some in the wild in the Valdavian rainforest, which is where it's cool but never hot. And never cold either, for that matter. But these are great to have in your landscapes because they are hummingbird magnets. And if I can have a fuchsia, that's great. It's just a favorite of mine, and something I missed until I figured out how to grow a few of them, because I brought some down with me and killed them. Anyways, we're going to go on to, I believe, a few other things which I don't directly connect with a specific plant. So, but camellias and magnolias are some things that we can grow down here. I love Magnolia laevifolia, which is a shrubbier species of magnolia, which will fit into your landscape. And you would never think of this. You might use this like a rhododendron, as far as I'm concerned, or or even a crabapple, or a lilac in place of those. But these Magnolia laevifolia produces thousands of flowers on a mature plant, and they're just spectacular in the spring and early summer. Another more tree-like species is Magnolia mattiae, which actually up until last week was flowering in the garden, and it'll flower again and come in probably when we warm up again in a month, and then it'll flower again in the fall. They're great plants that you would not have had experience with further north. These are smaller plants, both of these, that fit in your landscape much easier than our own southern magnolias, which we can grow here, of course, but take up so much space. And they're also much more reliably flowering than some of the deciduous ones as well. If you haven't run into a camellia, I don't know where you've been here in the Southeast now, because you see them all over. We have camellias that flower in the fall, winter, spring. Theoretically, there's some that may ultimately be available that'll flower in our summers too. But for right now, those are the main seasons. Most of them are grown as large shrubs, though some of them can be used as a lower foundation. There's some that have tiny flowers that flower profusely, which is the Cyarrhina, which is the small white one in the middle, as well as the foliage that you're seeing in the upper right-hand corner of your screen without flowers. It's a totally different animal from the other camellias that you see. It's these small flowered selections, but underused. And another plant that, as soon as we warm up, these will be in flower as well, are the Daphnes. Daphne odora, we don't do well with a lot of the rock garden species of Daphnes, which you can grow further north, but we can do Daphne odora without too much problem as long as you do not overwater it. You will find them for sale and plant them, and you water them in, but you don't want to have them in a regularly irrigated bed, because they do rot readily. But if you can be a little bit of a neglectful gardener, sometimes in this case, you're probably going to be rewarded with wonderfully fragrant flowers in the mid to late winter into early spring. So fragrant. And then there's a lot of different foliar forms, which we have a fairly good collection here at the Arboretum. But typically green-leafed ones are just as great as far as I'm concerned. Now getting into herbaceous stuff back here. With the woodies, we have some of the same issues, the heat, and it just heats up so quickly, not enough chill, or humid summers. It kills so many things, and some of the favorites, which you'll see, but there are some things that we have close relatives that we can grow instead, or you could grow some of them as an annual, and often it's as a cool season annual. Instead of having a summer blooming plant, we grow them as something you plant in the fall and flowers in the spring, and then either it dies on its own or you remove it. So but we'll find a few things that have better choices. So one I grew up with, my grandmother had them, my mom had them, are lupines. Most of the lupins come from breeding are hybrids of Lupinus polyphyllus, which is a Western species, crossing it with other species, mostly from the Western United States. They don't like our summer heat, for instance, and they tend to rot. They are very short-lived if they do survive more than one season. They come into flower right as we're getting hot, and so you have a short display typically with them. So we can grow them as annuals, like I said. So, or plants in the probably sow the seed late summer, early fall, and plant them out in the early or late fall, early winter, and have them flower in the spring. And then they either, like I said, they rot or you remove them because they look so bad. But those are the ways you can do that. But a cousin of those, it's just super easy, and it's an annual, is the Texas bluebonnet. There aren't as many colors of them, and they're a bit shorter, but you can still get those lupin blossoms fairly easily here. And all you do with those is direct sow the seeds in the fall, and they'll come up and grow through the winter months, and then they flower in the spring, and they complete their life cycle in flower. And they will self-sow if you get them in the right situation. So you don't have, they'll kind of act as a perennial without being a true perennial. But something that's native to much of the half of the United States are the baptisias or the false indigos, and they give that appearance of lupins. They're very long-lived. They do have a relatively short flowering period. Is the only thing I will say with these. There are few insects, or even fewer diseases, though. I do get an issue with a broom moth caterpillar eating my lupins and making them look a little bit bedraggled during the summer, but they still come up each spring and flower profusely. These were an old patch that we had as a possibility of pulling some selections from. I think in 2008 is what this picture was taken, but this just gives an idea of what's out there color-wise. Some yellows, burgundy kinds, pinks, whites, blues. So they're all there, really easy. And these are plants you plant and you do not bother them. They are like a peony. You plant them and forget them. Otherwise, they do not want to be disturbed. So easy going for us here. So another one that will be coming up here for us are tulips. This is my grandma's flower bed back home in Pennsylvania when I was growing up. She had tulips every year, didn't have to plant those all every year. Down here, the only way you get those is to plant them every year. There's foregrounds, there's pansies. Don't plant pansies in the spring here, plant them in the fall. But anyways, tall tulips tend to not be a long-lived perennial for us here. You can get them and plant them in the fall, in early winter, and they'll flower in the spring. If the squirrels don't eat them, that is, the rabbits don't eat them, or the deer. All those candy. They're candy for those, even with treatments. So, anyways, they typically don't perennialize the tall types, but there's some species type tulips that have done really well for us here. They tend to come up earlier, so they're able to recover from heat. The tall ones don't, they come up late and don't recover enough to get energy to reflower if they do survive, if the squirrel's eating them. These species tend to multiply much more quickly. So if you lose a few, it tends to be that the squirrels don't get them all. And they tend to perpetuate themselves. They come up a little bit earlier, like I said, and flower earlier. They're much more graceful in my experience and the way I look at it. And some of them here are the linifolia types, like honky tonk, and then the clusianas hybrids are great for us. A few others that we have that have done really well are hybrids like Little Beauty, which are probably a humilis selection, and Tangerine Beauty, which is Vendiskii, maybe, if I can spit that out. And so, and this Orphandiae subspecies Vitalii, those have all done great for us. Again, get them established. They tend to multiply if when they're happy. And like I said, the squirrels don't bother them as much then. But if you want something that maybe kind of give you reminiscent of a tulip that would be some of the anemones, I don't get critters eating these. They're from the Mediterranean. They can start flowering. Some years, last year they were flowering in January, and I had them go into April here and there throughout the winter months. So they have a longer flowering period. You'll get more than one flower for per plant too. So. Anyways, great if you have the right spot. They want full sun and well-drained soil. Even if they don't perennialize, you can grow these as an annual. And again, the squirrels and rabbits are less likely to bother them. And get some different colors. Something on that same line would be poppies, which we cannot really grow the Oriental poppy down here quite well. They just rot out. They're from Central Asia, again, Turkey, Iran, where they have hot. They go summer dormant where they don't get any rain, and they just rot here. They need cold nights in the winter, or cold in the winter, and don't want heat in the summer and humidity. So we have that too much. But you can grow as annuals fairly easily. You can get the Iceland poppies, and again, plant them in the fall, and you'll get beautiful displays starting probably February or March into April, and sometimes even into May. And again, the critters don't bother them as much. Delphiniums, those spectacular blues. Oh, I wish we could grow them, but they are not happy here, at least the tall ones. Again, they're from Central Asia and from Europe to northern Central Asia is where the genetics comes from those. And you can plant them again in the fall and they'll grow as an annual, but don't expect them to persist into the summer or survive much further than May in our climate here. Grow them for their spring display. But things that will work here are the larkspurs, which are their Mediterranean cousins. They're self-sowing annuals. Sow them in the fall. They come up, grow in the winter, and flower in May, June here. And then they naturally die down. But then you will have seedlings the next year. Unless you're so very fastidious and gets rid of every single seed, you will have some come back up, and you perpetuate them that way. They're almost a perennial that way. An alternative to them that's a North American native are the Camasias, which are several species, but they get blues, purples, whites, and there's even some pink selections of them. They're a bulb, and it's not one that's bothered by critters either. No one wants to eat it, and it'll grow in somewhat wet situations, unlike delphinium that don't like that. They just go summer dormant when they're finished, and fill their gap with something else through the summer months. Have some other perennial grow on top of them. Salvias, there's just literally dozens of salvias we can grow. And this is just a sampling here. We have shrubs, we have herbaceous perennials, we have ones that flower for 3 to 6 months. We have ones that only flower for a month. So try salvias in our climate. And one last group here that you've never probably thought of are syningias, which are commonly called hardy gloxinias. They're African violet relatives from Central and South America. These literally flower for us for 3 months in the garden. And again, they have these tuberous roots that allow them to get through the cold times as well as droughty times. And I think you can see I have a hummingbird in one picture there, and that they are hummingbird magnets. Again, in the wild, they're pollinated by them. So some species and hybrids have fragrance. Well, a lot of them don't. But either way, you're going to have a great display. And that hummingbird is to indicate that is my last slide. I have birds on my last slide almost every time.